lies, propaganda, and truth. Welcome, General Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA and NSA. Dr. VijayRaghavan, well-known scientist and also the current state secretary in the government of India. And Katherine Maher, the CEO of Wikimedia Foundation. Katherine, you are the head of the Wikimedia Foundation that runs Wikipedia. 40 million articles.
40 million yes, that's right.
Updated 300 times a minute in 300 different languages.
Yes.
I have read somewhere that you have said that it's fantastic that something that wouldn't work in theory actually works in practice. What do you mean by that?
Well, we would say that the only way it would work is in practice. What we mean when we say that is the concept of Wikipedia makes no sense. How could you get people from all over the world speaking all these different languages to agree on anything, let alone very controversial, very sensitive subjects, whether it's national borders or people's religions or frankly even people's feelings about television shows, and yet it does. And the reason that it does, and I think it's relevant to this conversation today, is because we're not trying to solve the problems of knowledge at scale. We're actually solving the problems of knowledge at at the level of the sentence and at the level of the citation. So we take a very big problem and break it down to very small problems to find some sort of consensus around what our shared knowledge actually is.
And do you manage to solve it?
Well, more than 1 billion people visit Wikipedia every single month, so I think we're adding some value to the world, certainly. I'll keep looking to see, I think probably there's a lot of users in the audience today.
Thanks. Dr. VijayRaghavan, scientist and politician. I guess as a politician, you are involved in areas close to propaganda, or at least trying to convince people. As a scientist, maybe you're focusing more, I hope, on facts, maybe even truth. How do you balance that or is there a balance to work with from your perspective?
First of all, I'm a science bureaucrat, not a politician. So my day job is to present facts to our elected representatives so that they can make appropriate decisions. And as a scientist, as we heard today, there is evidence which comes to bear on decision making in everything we do as a scientist, but also evidence must come to bear on policy. Now the trick is that, and this is very important, is politicians are elected every few years, but hard decisions need to be taken which have consequences for implementation over a much longer time period. So how do you actually communicate the possibilities, the range of decision making, which allows our elected representatives to take decisions which are seen as being valuable in the short term from a political, social, economic point of view, but also have value in the long term in terms of benefit to society. And there is a range of possibilities, and therefore communication with those who are elected is very critical to convey that range of possibilities.
Thanks. We're going to come back to that, of course. General Michael Hayden, I saw that a few weeks ago you went out with, I think it was a tweet, or at least a comment, where you said that if this is who we are becoming, I have wasted 40 years of my life.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah, it was in response to a tweet that the president had put out there, specifically charging CNN International with creating a misleading impression of America. CNN responded with, "That's not our job, that's your job. We report the news." But I was offended by the whole context of the tweet, which seemed to be an assault on a free press, on the First Amendment, and truth at base. And so I, out of anger, tweeted, and I made it conditional. You've got it quoted correctly. If this is who we are, or if this is who we are becoming, comma, I fear that I've wasted 40 years of my life because, in the armed forces of the United States, you take the oath of office to the Constitution, not to the president, not even to the homeland. It's to the Constitution. It's to the idea. It's in its own way a reminder that we're a creedal nation based on creed rather than soil and blood or even shared history. And it seemed to me that the president was just redefining that to which we take the oath. which is the idea of America, not a physical entity.
They often say that in war, truth is the first casualty. And I don't know if you agree with me that there is some kind of information war going on. And maybe you can say that there is a war going on between the lies, between the propaganda, and the facts, and maybe truth. Do you agree? And do you have any comments on that?
Yes,
Katherine?
I mean, I find it very interesting that you have organizations like the International Cross and Red Crescent talking about how do they think about, should it be within their mandate to address the victims of information war. So I think we are in a place where we're having a conversation that is very different than we have had in the past. I mean, set aside cyber war, which is a very real domain, but we're talking about what the nature of information actually looks like in this conflict. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about, I think we've talked a lot about the problem set, but we were just talking, what are the institutions, what is the obligation of institutions to actually think about what the future looks like if we actually want to pass through this period with our integrity intact?
And do you want to share if you came up with any conclusions or any?
One of the aspects which has come out from this morning's discussions and what's happening now is there is a range of views on what the ground reality is about. I mean, whether there are lies, propaganda, truth, and how they're mixed. But we need to now move from there to ask two questions. One, why is this happening? And two, what are the solutions? Now, it's happening, I don't know how it is happening in societies such as the United States, one hears about it, but in many parts of the world, there is a danger of alienation between those who are the elites who understand and are delving into science, for example, or other specializations, and large numbers of people who till recently were told what is right or what is wrong about science, but who are not participatory in the understanding of science. So unless we bring in more and more people into understanding the ways of science and the ways of decision making and the ways in which uncertainties are there, yet decision making can be made, we are going to broaden this gap. And therefore, despite however polarized discussions are in America or elsewhere in the world or in India or anywhere else, our job as scientists and science administrators is to bring people into the middle ground in terms of discussions, have civil debate about what is possible and what is not, given facts, and allow a range of opinions to be there using the same set of facts. So that's a challenge.
When you say we, do you mean we as the government, we as media, we as citizens, or as a society?
I think we as a society, because I see a worrying tendency to be certain in the views in which we hold and certain about what is right and what is wrong without listening to other people who have similar certain views. Now, of course, there are areas where one can't debate the facts. The facts stand as they are. So I'm not talking about those extremes. I'm talking about a penumbra where civil debate can take place. And we should actually get people out of that penumbra into a zone where one can discuss rather than push people away from that. It's
Hayden?
Yeah, Karen made a really interesting distinction. She said cyber information. And in the American sense, I was kind of present at the creation. I got assigned to Texas in the mid-1990s to take over a large command in the Air Force. And the American Air Force was kind of cutting edge when it came to the cyber thing. And there are lots of historical reasons, but most of what we were thinking has now become American military doctrine. I mean, one thing we said was land, sea, air, space, cyber. It's a domain, it's a place, it's a location. We're going to go operate there, which was transformative. Simple now, not then. But we had a debate back in the day, in the mid-1990s, and it had all the intensity of Jesuits at a medieval university, all right? And it was, were we in the cyber dominance business or the information dominance business? And we looked at both, and the information dominance thing, cyber would be a subset, but it would include deception and public affairs and public diplomacy. It would go... Two reactions. Number one, whoa, that looks really hard. Okay. And number two,
it was, I guess.
It was. And number two, you could not approach it within the American political culture without bumping immediately into First and Fourth Amendment serious concerns.
Right.
So we went over here. We went full speed ahead in the cyber lane. That's why we've now got a cyber command. The Russians went to curtain number 2. Okay. Under you can read it in General Gerasimov's manuscript as to
That
the
we all
Russians.
have read, of course.
Of course.
In either Russian or English, it comes across.
Good.
It talks about an opportunity for an inherently weaker power in these other domains to, in an asymmetrical way, exercise contactless power, contactless influence. And the Russians have matured that. One final comment, which makes it even harder for my country to understand what happened and to respond to it, because we don't own that lens. Mm-hmm. That is not the lens with which we are practiced at looking at this thing.
Would you say that you did a mistake back then, or
No,
would
we
you
were
say it was,
true. It was all we could do inside of American values.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Right.
But we should have studied the adversary more so as to better understand what the adversary was willing to do in terms of information dominance. Very quickly, Russian separatists and Russian soldiers shot down an innocent Malaysian airliner on course about 3 years ago. And this Russian information bubble, information dominance machine created so much confusion that really good, honest, smart people have simply decided, wow, I wonder what really happened there. And what really happened there is obvious. But this Russian effort was so all-encompassing that it, in essence, took truth off the table.
But one thing that has changed, I'm sorry.
Please,
One thing, you said you wanted to have a conversation. One thing that has changed to me in the time period that you're describing is the vectors themselves through which information passes through has changed so substantively when we look at the consolidation of information dissemination mechanisms. And I am talking the big corporate platforms that are responsible for most of the way that many of us get our news and information. And that didn't exist. It was a far more diffuse information economy in the past. And so while the nature of deception or propaganda is not new, it's state-sponsored misinformation has been around for a very long time, the channels for distribution and the speed of distribution has changed significantly.
Right. And put another way, it's less curated by these institutions.
Or it is curated, but it's curated with very little accountability.
Well, I
Because it's
would say
algorithmically curated.
Well, okay, now that would I would agree. But there I think most people get their news online through social media, through a universe in which they have self-segregated into like-minded folk. And so if you're talented at this, you can push news forward, make it appear as if thousands, if not millions of people are saying so, and goes into this information bubble, that the American word is gerrymandered, that's as gerrymandered as any state in the American Union. You only follow people like you, and thereby this story gets great power, not out of its logic, but out of its numbers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or the illusion thereof.
Yeah. Yes.
Which
the illusion of numbers. Yes.
Which I guess can lead us into the question of transparency, because that, of course, becomes extremely important when you either are in a bubble or or trying to break away. And I guess it's fair to say that we have two very opposite positions there. You, Wikipedia, I guess, is the definition of
Radical
transparency.
yes.
That is what it's all about.
Not WikiLeaks. I want to be clear, we're not the same organization.
And then we have CIA, NSA, maybe not full transparency, and then Indian government somewhere in between, maybe, or.
Well,
I think
go ahead.
my question is how important is the question of transparency to really reach, call it fact or call it truth? Who wants to begin? Vijay?
So I think this is a very critical point. And while we're talking about the ways social media can disseminate news which is not curated, we must keep in mind for large numbers of people all over the world, in South America, in parts of Asia, India, the impact of decision making is very real. And the impact of taking the right decision can be very positive. The impact of taking a wrong decision can have immediate consequences in a matter of few years. Vaccination, maternal and child health. I mean, these are important consequential decisions. Many people in India, for example, still, a great majority of people get their news from newspapers, print media. And they read a diverse set of opinions in print media, and they have communities which interact with very contradictory polls. So many of the stabilizing forces against random statements becoming truth exist in many societies. I think in America, for example, they exist hugely in terms of constitutional checks and balances, as they do in large democracies. And therefore, I'm much less pessimistic about the consequences of runaway views causing drastic changes. I mean, yeah.
Michael, any comments?
So, obviously, my business is best done in secret. Right? But we've seen a transformation in the political culture within which we reside, and we have to accommodate the political culture. If I say the word Snowden, everyone understands what I mean, and you get a whole storyline in the American press about things done. My old agency was really slow off the mark responding to that. It was slow off the mark because the most controversial program, when it involved American privacy, had been approved by not one but two presidents, was legislated by Congress, was overseen by two congressional committees who were big fans, and checked by the court every 60 days. So from our point of view, we call it the Madisonian trifecta. All three branches of government checked off. That's how we get legitimacy. We thought we would be okay. And as it turns out, we weren't okay. An awful lot of Americans, I'm not talking about the wingnuts, thought that no longer constituted consent of the governed. That constituted consent of the governors. You may have told them, you didn't tell me. And so my message to my old tribe is, we don't get to do this. We don't get the license to do this unless we tell the public more about what it is we do. And that's hard because it's still best done in secrecy.
Katherine, I guess you're a pro-transparency
As I was saying
advocate.
to General Hayden yesterday, we are actually suing the NSA over these very programs.
He's a former head of NSA. Then.
No, yes, of course, no.
But I started the program, she saw it.
As the Wikimedia Foundation. So we believe fundamentally that transparency is important when it comes to the integrity of information because we believe that people should have the right to know where that information comes from. The evidentiary chain of what you're reading and where it came from and your ability to scrutinize it and read critically into that information is so critical to an informed democracy. So I think that for us, transparency is a bedrock upon which we build everything else, and trust you cannot breed trust without that form of integrity and accountability back to the public. And I would say that's true not just for Wikipedia, but for any institution that's looking to serve the public in this day and age. So,
Katherine Maher, Dr. VijayRaghavan, General Michael Hayden. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.